Looking forward to the best Christmas ever, filled with fun, smiles, and laughter.
Terrifier 3 hit theaters this past weekend. It is, of course, the latest entry into the gore-filled Terrifier franchise. It is once again directed by Damien Leone and brings back David Howard Thornton as Art the Clown, while also bringing back Lauren Laverne as Sienna Shaw, the only person to go head-to-head with the sadistic Art the Clown and win. And of course, I'm referencing events from the second film where this movie starts off. And I like that about the Terrifier franchise. Part 1 directly leads into Part 2, and now Part 2 directly leads in to Part 3. Now, before going any further, this is a franchise that I had completely sworn off in previous Terrifier review videos. I watched the first one, said this isn't really my theme, but I'm willing to give Part 2 a chance. And Part 2, I absolutely hated. It was my least favorite movie of that year. I hated everything about that movie, from the pace of the movie to the gore in the movie. There was nothing for me to enjoy personally. But with that said, I saw the preview for this movie, that it was centered around Christmas, and that got me interested in the film. So I went and saw it. Let's talk about it. So like I said, this movie starts off right after the events of the second film, and in this movie, you see Art the Clown's decapitated body get up and go find the severed head that had been birthed at the end of the second film. If you've never seen any of the Terrifier franchise and you're watching this review for this first time, that's going to be a really weird setup for a film, but that's the setup that we get. If you're a mega fan, you know what I'm talking about. Let's move on. But at that point, Art the Clown decides to go into hibernation for at least 5 years, because then a time jump of 5 years happens. You find out that Sienna Shaw has been in a mental institution for the past 5 years, but as she is getting out, going back into the real world, so is Art the Clown. And they both happen to hit the real world right around Christmas, and that is where this movie really starts to take off, because now you have Art the Clown dressed up as Santa Claus after encountering a very unfortunate Santa who meets his demise by the hands of Art the Clown, and now you have Art dressed up as Santa going around and sadistically murdering so many people and making his way towards Sienna Shaw so they can have yet another showdown. And that's the best synopsis that I can give you for Terrifier 3. If that sounds like an interesting premise for a film, you should go check this movie out. Big warning though, if you're not a fan of mega gore in a film, this is not going to be for you. So if that sounds like an interesting setup, but you don't like gore, I'm not going to recommend this film. However, if you love gore, if you love your B-movie slashers, and you like Christmas, and you like Art the Clown, mash them all up, you might have a decent enough time. Let's get into some of my positives and some of my negatives. I was just thinking about it before getting into my positives. The fact that I have positives this time around should be considered a positive, because in the second film, there wasn't one redeemable quality in my opinion. I still really dislike that film. I have not rewatched it since the first time I watched it in theaters. Maybe if I rewatched it now, I'd look on it a little differently. But for me personally, as of my only viewing of that film, it still stands as the worst movie of that year, a movie that I did not enjoy at all. And the fact that I watched this film and I have a few positives, to me, that's a positive in and of itself. But with that said, my real positives start with this. My first positive out the gate on this film is going to be the pace of this film. I thought that this movie was paced so much better than the first two films. In the first movie, you have Art sort of just following these girls around until he gets them trapped in a building and then starts taking them apart. And anybody who tries to help the girls because they see that they're in any sort of danger, he just kills along the way. And that's basically the entire storyline for that movie. There's not much more there. If you're there for the blood and guts, the movie delivers it all the way throughout the movie, all the way to the bloody finish. In the second film, they do try to give you a bunch of backstory about maybe where Art the Clown came from and why Sienna has these magical powers, but I feel like the pacing of that movie was all off. You had these really sadistic scenes with Art the Clown and these people that are just going door to door trick-or-treating, or different houses that are passing out candy, and they're really intense. And there are some moments like the sunglasses scene that break up that intensity, but there's so many moments where they try to give you this backstory, this lore, and for me, it just slowed the pace of the movie down. Whereas this movie, I thought everything they built into this movie, whether it was some of those gory, bloody scenes that are always going to be in a Terrifier film, or some of the backstory and lore, for me, it never slowed down. The pace was almost perfect for a movie like this. I'm not saying it was a perfectly paced film, I'm saying for a Terrifier film, film, it is the best paced film, in my opinion. You do get some flashbacks with Sienna and her father, someone we haven't seen in this franchise yet, we've just heard about, and you see him drawing these different characters, and so you're starting to think, okay, some of these characters came from the drawings from her dad, and so you get to see some of those drawings and some of those moments between her and her dad from back in the day, and those scenes could have slowed the pace of this movie down terribly, but I felt like they were needed. You'd get these really nasty, sadistic scenes with art that we've come to expect, but then it would say, okay, we've seen that scene, now you get a little bit of backstory, or we're going to further the plot of this movie, which again, I think the second film did a terrible job with. I think furthering the plot in that movie, it didn't do it very well, whereas I thought this movie furthered the plot, and I thought the pace stayed consistent throughout the entire film. This movie was only 15 minutes shorter than the second film, but I didn't look at my watch the way I did 20 minutes into the second Terrifier film. So for me, the pace is a huge positive. Next positive for this film is that if you enjoy blood and guts and gore and B-movie style slashers, well then this is going to be for you. Personally, I'm somewhere in the middle on this, so it's not a full positive for me, but I guess for this video, for the audience that I know is going to be coming and looking at this, I will say if you're a huge gore fan, this is going to be huge for you. And I would add to that I think that by the time you get to the third entry in the franchise, if you're not a gore fan, then just don't watch this movie. This isn't going to be for you. These movies are now notorious for having absolutely disgusting, bloody scenes in a film, pushing the boundaries of what we've seen in films that are released in the theater. And so by the third movie, I can't really put that as a negative, even though it's not necessarily my theme. Again, if you're there for the gore, the blood, the guts, then this movie's got it. My next positive has to be Art the Clown. He's funny in this movie. Like, there's a scene in this film where Sienna is tied up, and I won't say when it's in the film, it's just Sienna's tied up, and every time Art goes to do something in the room, he slaps her in the back of the head. And having that moment of levity every couple of minutes in that very gory scene really helped. It did. And this kind of goes back to the pace of the film, where again, it just stays consistent the entire time, where Art is waiting outside of the room where these two people are talking at one point in the movie, and he's listening to their conversation, and the guy looks at the girl and goes, "Yeah, you just want to have sex with him, huh?" And he gets all smiley and happy, and then she goes, "Of course I don't." He gets all like, ugh. Of course. But of course, he's a mute clown, so just seeing all of the reactions from David Howard Thornton in this film, they really worked for me. It was like that one sunglasses scene from the second movie. They sort of built onto that, and I really appreciated that. So the humor that came out of Art the Clown, even though he's this nasty, sadistic serial killer throughout the film, it was still a lot of fun to watch him go around and kind of be funny throughout this film. When you can take the most disgusting aspect of your film, Art the Clown, and you can still make the audience laugh with him, to me, that's a positive. And my final positive for this film was setting it around Christmas. What a way to draw me back. I just want to give the director props for this. Setting this film at Christmas time almost guaranteed that I would go see this film. And listen, I know he didn't do it for me. He did it for all of the Terrifier fans. But this movie being set at Christmas gave it a hook. Something I think that was missing from the previous two Terrifier movies. Yes, the second film, I don't know if the first one was filmed around Halloween or if it was supposed to be Halloween night. Maybe it was. But the second film for sure was, because you had kids going trick-or-treating throughout. And so that movie was filmed around Halloween, but I appreciate that. Yeah, it's a Halloween scary movie. That's great. But setting this movie at Christmas really gave the ability to have some beautiful colors in this film. And even while it's a low-budget horror film, you do get some beautiful colors just because they're able to brighten up every scene of this film with different colorful bulbs, with different garlands, with different wreaths, and all of that worked because I love Christmas. And so I knew going into this movie I was going to like the Christmas aspect. I had no idea I was going to love the Christmas aspect of this movie. And so the fact that they set this around Christmas really worked for me, and to the point where now that I've talked about it so much, I kind of want to go see it again. And that is something I never thought I would say in a million years, because this is a Terrifier film. I haven't been a big fan of the previous two films, but this movie worked for me on everything I've already said, and now just how bright and colorful some of these scenes are. And when you think about it, this is a dark, gritty horror B-movie slasher, and there's blood and guts everywhere, and yet somehow in every scene I'm like, yeah, but it's also Christmas time and kind of pretty. And I loved that about this movie. And that'll lead me over to my negatives. So my first negative for this film is that there are some meaningful deaths that happen off screen. And I don't mean anything that has to do with children, because I will say that it was a little weird that they shied away from actually showing children die in this movie, because this movie has a lot of children's death, but they cut away from those every single time. But as an audience member, as someone with kids, I actually didn't mind that at all. You heard it sometimes, you saw something happen at one point, but you never actually saw something happen to a child, and I appreciated that from this movie. Maybe I should have put that in my positives. But we're on my negatives now, and my negative is that there are some meaningful deaths in this movie that are just completely off camera. Now, you could make the case for one of these deaths that happened toward the end of the third act, where you're like, okay, maybe that death isn't real, and they're making a fourth film and that character is going to show up there. Okay, you can make the case for that, and I'll give it a pass. You never saw a body, maybe that person's not really dead. But there's another person who's very meaningful to Sienna in this film, and you just see their severed head on top of a Christmas tree, and it's a cool visual, but I'm like, wait a minute, what happened to that person? Like, you showed me so many deaths throughout this film, so many deaths that, like, I didn't know that person from Adam. It's like, wrong place, wrong time for that guy. Sucks to be you, but you're in a Terrifier film, you know what's going to happen to you. But you get to these meaningful deaths toward the end, and they just cut them out completely, and I don't understand why they would do that, especially in a Terrifier franchise. Like, you've never shied away from showing me deaths of anybody before, but you're gonna go away from showing me a very meaningful death toward the end, and for me, that was a negative. My next negative is that the kills in this movie do still look very B-movie. And here's the thing. It's a movie that was on a $2 million budget, so what you see in this film, if it looks gross to you, that's the intent, but it does still look fake. It still looks like a B-movie slasher, and that's what you get out of this film. Now, B-movie slasher fans, people excited about the franchise, they're not going to care about that. That's not going to be a negative to them. But I guess part of the problem was it looks really fake, and also there's so much of it. And so when you get so much fake-looking gore, halfway through the movie, you just sort of become numb to it. In the first opening act of this movie, he goes through a house on this rampage, taking people out. You see all this blood and guts happen. As he's going to sit dormant for the next 5 years, some stuff happens, and it's like, oh, that's so rough to watch. But again, you get about halfway through this movie, and the gore and all the things happening, because of the way they look, just sort of become numb. You just kind of see that, and you're just like, all right, well, I've seen that happen so many times, not only in this franchise, but in this movie. And so you sort of become numb to these kills, especially because most of them look really fake. For instance, there's a shower scene in this movie that everybody has been raving about on X, everybody has been raving about online otherwise, and they're talking about the shower scene's crazy, I can't believe the shower scene happened, so I was really looking forward to it. And maybe I got a little too hyped for it, because when I saw it, my expectations weren't met. I've seen Art the Clown cut people up before, I've seen him go after people before. This wasn't, to me, anything new. There was a moment, and it's in the trailer, so this isn't a spoiler, where he does a snow angel in a puddle of blood, and so it's like a blood angel. That was a cool visual, but otherwise for the shower scene, to me, it just wasn't as impactful as it maybe could have been, because by the time it got there, I was just kind of numb to everything that Art had been doing throughout the rest of the film. And my final negative for this film is that somehow this movie feels very chopped up when you get toward the end of this movie. And I don't know if that is an artistic choice by Damien Leone. Maybe he's got plans for part 4, doesn't want to completely show his hand yet, so when we see Terrifier 4 down the line, we'll be like, oh my goodness, okay, that makes sense why that was happening when this was going on, and why we didn't necessarily get to see this happen at the end of Terrifier 3. But because of the way it currently is now, it's a negative for me, because so much of this movie feels really choppy towards the last half of this film, especially in that last act. And I'm not asking for a longer Terrifier film. That was one of my gripes from the second film, was that it was way too long. So much of that second film was so long, and just I kept looking at my watch, kept waiting to leave the theater, and I stuck it out to the very end. This movie didn't have that issue. I like the pace, I like the consistency, and so maybe for the pace and the consistency of this film, they had to take some things out. But yeah, there's just things in this movie that feel like they were completely chopped out. In my own personal opinion, it feels like they chopped this movie up, especially towards the end. And again, maybe that's an artistic thing, maybe it's going to get to the fourth film and it's all going to be explained, but for now, that's a negative. Overall, I will say that if you're a big fan of the Terrifier franchise, you liked 1, you love 2, however you feel about those movies, if you enjoyed them, then you should go out and check out Terrifier 3. I think it expands on the entire franchise as a whole. I think it's the prettiest looking Terrifier film. I think Art does some of the most sadistic things in this film. There's one thing that happens with rats that I'm not even going to go into because I'm pretty sure YouTube would just not let this video go up if you straight up talked about it, so I'm not going to talk about it here. There is a pretty gnarly scene with rats. But that said, overall, would I recommend this to the average viewer? And that is a big no. If you're not a big fan of blood and guts, I don't recommend this movie. If you're not a fan of somebody chopping people up for a good amount of the 2 hours and 5 minutes that this movie runs for, then I would say don't go check this movie out. Wait for this movie at home. Don't go see it in theaters. When you can watch it at home and pause it, maybe watch it then. If you like a fun B-movie Christmas horror film, this is going to be right up your alley, and I highly recommend it. I personally won't be shocked if it's on my most surprising movies of 2024 list because, again, I was surprised that I actually even enjoyed anything about this film, but I ended up liking most of it. With all that said, though, guys, those are just my opinions because that's my review for Terrifier 3. Have you had a chance to see this movie yet? If you have, let me know in the comment section down below. Maybe we agree or disagree. Maybe you're somebody that once upon a time commented on my Terrifier 2 review telling me how wrong I was, and I would love to know if you watched this film and if we agree now, because it's just interesting how things change. But with all that said, though, guys, if you like this video and you want to watch more, don't forget to hit the like button because it helps the video, it helps the channel, and it helps me right here. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Alright guys, we got to the end of my Terrifier 3 review. If you made it this far, I appreciate it. I really do. If you watched past those end credits and you watch the after credit scene here, it means a lot to me. I appreciate that. And so I have a quick question for you. Now that Terrifier 3 is out of the way and we're halfway through October, Smile 2 comes out this weekend, so we're going to take that off the table. What horror films are you looking forward to for the rest of 2024? I mean, yeah, you could throw Smile 2 on there if you want, but it's about to come out. I'm talking about movies that are still coming out this year. I think for me, the biggest one has to be Nosferatu. I'm really looking forward to that one. But until those movies come out and I put reviews up for those, I've got all of my horror movie reviews right there, and I've got all of my 2024 movie reviews right there.